and welcome to the Safer Buildings Coalition podcast today. We're fortunate to have with us International Association of Fire Chiefs Communications Committee Chair, Chief Gary McCarraher. My name's Alan Perdue. I'm the Executive Director of the Safer Buildings Coalition, and it's certainly an honor to have you here, Gary.
Well, thanks for having me, Alan. I'm more than happy to be here.
Today we're going to talk about some of the code issues as they relate to in-building communications. We hear a lot of discussion going on. There's a lot of growth in the market about in-building public safety systems, and there's a lot of miscommunication out there, and we hope during this podcast to bring some resolution to some of that information and to help bring some clarity to where in-building and fire codes are and where they're going in the future. So Gary, let's start out. One of the things that I get asked a lot is who adopts what code? How do we know what code's in play? How do jurisdictions identify what's adopted in their jurisdiction?
Well, most jurisdictions adopt codes on a building code specifically on a state-by-state basis. And, you know, there are the big code compliance organization, the International Building Code being a predominant one, the NFPA being another predominant one. So you really need to check with your state to see what codes have been adopted statewide. And then it really, you know, it's sort of a potpourri, if you will, of codes. Some states allow counties or individual municipalities to adopt portions of codes and not portions of others. For example, I work in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the Commonwealth has a unified state code and doesn't allow any municipality within the Commonwealth to alter that code or to, you know, adopt portions of other codes. So you really need to check at the state level and see what the adoption process is and what local options are available to you.
All right, great. One of the things I've been asked is there a master list out there of who adopts what? And the answer is certainly no. But one of the things that we've spoken about is the jurisdictions posting on their website what these requirements are. This is a new requirement in the code when we compare it to fire alarms and fire sprinkler systems and how long they've been around. So, you know, the industry is reaching out trying to figure out exactly what they need to do and how to do it. Do you think it would be advantageous or even possible to encourage jurisdictions to post on their website what they adopt related to in-building and have that information available? I know the code requires some basic information to be provided anyway. Do you think that's feasible?
I really think that's an outstanding idea. I mean, you know, we get calls all the time in our office of, you know, what are the requirements? And we live in a state that has a statewide code. So, you know, all buildings are built locally. They're not built on a statewide basis, and that's really the basis of some of the confusion folks have. So, the more you can reach out to the construction industry and let them know what the code process is, I think the better everybody is on both sides of the issue.
Great. You know, one of the things when you look at, you know, the International Fire Code, Section 510 or NFPA 1221, which is where the regulations now reside concerning in-building, they apply to new buildings, but there's also some retroactive requirements. How does public safety see the retroactive requirements coming into play in the near future? Do you think that's something that will take place?
You know, it's really difficult. Our entire code model, if you will, at least the one I've been taught over my career, doesn't prepare us to deal with that very well, and I think we'll all struggle with that. And I think also building owners will struggle with that because it's not how any other system typically within the code process is managed. But the difference is that the in-building communication is a dynamic process. It's not a static process. There are things that will happen around that building in its life cycle that will affect how public safety can communicate within buildings. And that's really the essence of the need for the process of going back and making sure that there's still audibility in the buildings for public safety. But it certainly hasn't been taught to us that way over most people's careers.
All right, thank you, Chief. One of the new things out, and I know you being chair of the IFC Communications Committee, having a lot of dealings with FirstNet. We hear, how do we become FirstNet ready when FirstNet's ready for us? Do you see the FirstNet rollout having an impact on in-building solutions?
Not at present. FirstNet in its initial rollout will be a data system. So that the land mobile radio requirement to communicate inside buildings will be here for the foreseeable future. Voice over broadband for public safety usage is certainly coming, but it's not as near as a lot of people want to say it is. There's international standards that have to be done. There's a lot of technological improvements that need to be done. So, I'm guessing that LMR is going to be around for at least another generation. So the BDA system will be a critical component of voice, critical mission voice for public safety. The FirstNet will be the data component for that. And as we mature into data disposition between buildings, we'll need to morph into that. But I think because that technology is not well out, but the FirstNet rollout should be within the next 24 months or so. But we have no experience of what data we're going to push in and out of buildings. So it's difficult to comprehend what we're going to need for that.
Great. Thank you on that, Chief. One of the things that comes up with building owners is, when do I know if I need an in-building solution? How do I measure that impact where I'm building? From an AHJ standpoint, how do you see that impacting your world, measuring the need for coverage, and what state should a building owner or a building contractor get involved with the AHJ?
I think as with every process we deal with, the earlier the better. And I can give you an example in my community. I have a large commercial building that's being altered with an addition put onto it. And I got it, and I was on an email trail from the engineer saying that the fire chief can waive the requirement for BDAs in a building. And I've not been able to find that code provision. The code is pretty clear that there needs to be accommodations for public safety radio communications inside buildings. The question is that will a BDA be required to accomplish that? Competent engineering studies can go through existing buildings or buildings under alteration and understand whether that's happening. With new buildings, I really, because it's so new, I don't think that there's any cookie-cutter solution to that. My advice to these engineers and all building owners that come before us is that you got to plan for a BDA, and as your tests make you comfortable that you don't need a BDA for public safety communications, you may be able to take it out of the building, but you certainly have to plan for it up front.
Yeah, I've heard of several building owners, pre-piping buildings. They go ahead and put the conduit in place so that they have that avenue to get coax and cables and things where they need to get them just in case, because you're right, oftentimes at the 11th hour you realize that the window tinting that you put on the building blocks the RF.
Exactly, and that's and I'm real confident in our capacity to develop technologies that there may be some sort of algorithm developed over time that will allow engineers to say this building will need it, this building won't need it. But certainly the level of technology is not here today. So I think that the process of sort of piping the backbone is very competent.
Do you think it's possible or already being done that jurisdictions are tracking current existing buildings where they're having a problem? Would it be a fair assessment to say that if I'm starting a new building and there's an issue in two neighboring buildings, the likelihood is I'll need a system? Are departments tracking that or have the capability to possibly track that in their records management system, in their pre-planned system?
I think it's possible. I think because the BDA process is so new to the fire service, I don't think we're doing it. I think that there are some jurisdictions doing it much better than others. In addition to that, it's important for the fire service to track that because, as you know, a BDA operating errantly can really take down your communication system. So you need to know where those are in your community so that if you have LMR problems, and it's created by a BDA, you can get to that rectified pretty quickly.
And that is a requirement with the FCC and the code is to make the AHJs aware of systems that are put in, and that brings up the point of plan review, submitting the data to the local AHJ to make them aware because it can create significant issues, correct?
That's correct. I was actually in the city of Worcester yesterday and was talking to their folks. And Worcester's the second largest city in New England. They were down, their fire communications were down for a period of 6 hours because of an errant BDA. And it just took them that long to figure it out and get it offline.
After measurement and determining a system has to put in, to obtain a certificate of occupancy to occupy the building, the system has to be tested. How are you guys involved in the testing of those systems so that a certificate of occupancy can be obtained?
We're really looking at, the results of engineers who know their trade to go in and do buildings. I sit on a code board here in Massachusetts, and I listen to my colleagues on the board who are engineers and architects, and it seems, again, it's a new requirement to the code. It really runs the gamut. In Massachusetts, at least, you have folks recreating the old Sprint commercial with a handheld mobile radio, walking around the building calling dispatch saying, "Can you hear me now?" to the other extreme of requiring over-engineered analysis of compliance with the standard. But I think you really need to partner with the installer and make sure that they're certified on the devices and they have the competent engineering tests to prove out that the system works.
Great, Chief. NFPA and ICC both publish model code language. Excuse me. How important is it to the industry and to the fire community, the public safety community, to bring these standards as close together as possible to make installation, inspection, maintenance of these systems simpler?
I think in our complex and fast-paced world, I think it's important. It's important because fire service organizations are mobile and people move all over, so that if you move from one jurisdiction to another, you should have a pretty good understanding of what the operating system is. Additionally, the contracting industry is mobile. We have folks in our community building complexes that are from Florida. So to have them jump from requirement to requirement, it costs time and money. So the closer that we can bring a nationwide code together that has very, very similar characteristics, I think, is at the advantage of both the fire service and the industry.
That's great. And then, the key thing about any fire protection system, I know you've heard me speak before groups and say, in buildings, part of the life safety ecosystem of the building, just like fire alarms and fire sprinklers, the maintenance of those systems. Share with our audience how critical that is, ongoing maintenance, to make sure they're there when you need them.
So, yeah, and you're right. It's just like NFPA 13 for sprinkler systems. NFPA recently moved the BDA requirements to 1221 for communications. But, I really do envision, somewhat of a standalone system because it's the type of thing, when I talk to trade groups, who sometimes find it difficult to install BDAs, I ask them, how many people, when you send your folks out to do your job, to do the job during the day, never communicate with your folks? And if you had a need to communicate, you'd say, oh, I can't do that. Well, the fire service operates in a very time-compressed environment when life safety is a critical element. We have an instantaneous need to talk to these people, whether it's to provide them situational awareness or to get them more resources to do their job safely. We can't question whether we can talk or not, because if we can't talk, it puts lives in jeopardy very, very quickly. So we have to be able to rely on the in-building communications as equally as confident as we rely on sprinkler systems and all the other life safety systems within the building.
Thank you, Chief. Let's move into the code changes, code modifications that are coming up in the next couple of code cycles. Our audience may not be aware that every 3 years the model codes change, and then local jurisdictions adopt those based on their local political environment. But is the fire service concerned with helping make the code better day in and day out? I know I'll talk about two proposals that are going forward in 2 weeks in Kansas City. One is reducing battery backup from 24 hours to 12 hours, and another one is allowing battery charging equipment to be in NEMA 3R enclosures versus NEMA 4. Is that because the fire service is interested in helping with cost of systems and looking at, what's the right thing to do in those situations?
Yeah, I really do. I think, we're in the fire service, we're a very traditionally based operation. We do things today because it worked for us yesterday. The problem we run into is with the technology pace that is ongoing today, things are just moving so rapidly, and I think in the fire service we've finally got to the point that we recognize that the pace of technology, and we need to pick up our pace of understanding the needs of the industry. The battery systems of yesterday aren't the same as the battery systems of today. So those have changed, and as a result, we have to look at the context of where buildings operate. For example, with reducing the battery backup requirement, I'm an advocate of that. I think you take a look at the reliability of electronic systems today are much better than they were in the past when we first started looking at a 24-hour requirement. So I think we are. I think we're recognizing that, and I think the fire service in general will be supportive of that as we move forward, because it's really the only way we're going to cost effectively get these systems in buildings that will allow us to do our jobs properly.
Exactly, and you mentioned over-engineer. If you make it so rigid and so cumbersome to put in, the end result is nobody adopts it, correct?
Right. Exactly, and then we're the worse for wear. So it really is incumbent upon, the fire service to really, make sure that our understanding of technology keeps pace with what technology is available.
And that's why this code is really more performance based and less prescriptive than some of the other trade codes that we have adopted, because that technology is changing. I think one of the things I hear is what's best? Do we need an active DAS, a passive DAS? Do we need BDA? In your experience, are you seeing one size fits all, or do we need multiple tools in the toolbox to solve this challenge?
I think, like anything in our industry, you always need the multiple tool approach, because what we found is that if you have a one-size-fits-all solution, you'll always be running into problems. It's better to right-size the solution, which means you need multiple tools. Additionally, model code has to provide efficiency and operational capacity from the city of Boston to a place out that has, a population of 700 in the western part of our state. So to do that aptly, you really need to have multiple approaches.
Thank you, Chief. Chief, is there anything that you really want to get to our audience related to in-building solutions? Is something really important that we haven't covered that you'd like to get out to our listeners?
Well, I think we've covered it, but I just want to emphasize the fact that our environment today, from a LMR standpoint, is much noisier. There's more interference, and that's why BDAs are more important today than they were in the past. The only way we're going to solve the problem is bringing the fire service personnel, building owners, and the engineering community together to resolve it, to make sure that the people using the building can be served safely, and we protect both the citizens that we're sworn to serve as well as the firefighters.
Well, thank you, Chief. And, there's nothing more important than protecting our first responders and their mission to protect the public. That's what this is all about. We certainly want to thank the IFC for being a member of the Safer Buildings Coalition and working with us to help bring awareness and education as it relates to in-building solutions, of their importance, and working in the code world to make the code as good as it can be. I want to thank you, Chief, for your time and sharing some insight with us today from a fire chief and AHJ standpoint. For more information on the Safer Buildings Coalition, visit us at saferbuildings.org. And if you have a need for additional information on the International Association of Fire Chiefs, we encourage you to visit their website at iafc.org. Thank you very much, and have a great day.